Sun Lang glanced at him and flashed a smile. "I'm going to head out for a bit," he said. He turned and left after casually tossing out those words. Shirlian should have chased after him to ask him about it, but he had a strange feeling that since Sun Lang had said he would leave for a bit, then for sure he wouldn't be gone for too long. He would still definitely return. Thus, Shirlian went back inside the shrine. Shirlian started rummaging through his large bag of junk and dug out a wok and a large butcher knife. He eyed the vegetables on the altar and stood up. After one incense time, there was the sound of footfalls approaching the shrine as expected. One could imagine from those unhurried footsteps that it was a particular young man, strolling leisurely. The two objects in Shirlian's hands had now transformed into 2 plates of food. He looked over them and heaved a long sigh, unable to bear the sight of their tragedy. He set the plates down and went out for a look. Sure enough, he saw Sun Lang again. Outside the shrine, perhaps it was because of the blazing sun, but Sun Lang had his red tunic peeled and tied around his waist. It revealed his white undershirt, with its sleeves pulled back, looking rather clean and tidy. His right foot stepped on top of a large wooden board, and he had a hatchet in his left hand. The hatchet was probably borrowed from one of the neighbors. It looked blunt and heavy, but he wielded it so easily. It was as if it was a very sharp blade. Sun Lang nonchalantly hacked at the board, shaving off wood like dough. He peered from the corner of his eyes and saw Shirlian come out. "I'm just making something," Sun Lang said. Shirlian watched Sun Lang work and realized that he was making a door. It was just the perfect size, detailed and exquisite. Shirlian thought that since he must have come from a wealthy family, Sun Lang wouldn't be the physical labor type, but that was obviously not the case. There was definitely more to him than met the eye. "Thank you for your hard work, Sun Lang," Shirlian said. Sun Lang simply smiled, threw down the hatchet, and installed the door. He knocked on it twice and said, "If you're going to draw a seal, at least draw it on a proper door. It works better." Then he swept aside the curtain and entered the shrine. It seemed that the seal on the curtain really had no effect on him, and he didn't even care for it. Shirlian closed the new door behind him, but he couldn't help but open it again, and then close it again. He opened and closed it again, then again. Amazed by how well it was made, Shirlian opened and closed the door several times before suddenly realizing how foolish he was being. Sun Lang had already sat down inside, and Shirlian left the door to bring out steamed buns that the villagers had offered earlier in the morning onto the altar table. Sun Lang took a look at the buns and didn't say anything. He merely chuckled softly as if he knew something, but Shirlian ignored him and reached over to pour 2 bowls of water. Just as he was about to sit down, he saw Sun Lang rolling up his sleeves. There was a small line of tattoo with markings of strange characters on his arm. Sun Lang noticed his gaze and pulled down his sleeves, then smiled. "It was done when I was young." It was obvious that Sun Lang didn't want to speak more on the subject, so Shirlian didn't pursue it. He sat down and looked up at the portrait again. He said, "Sun Lang, you paint so well. Did someone at home teach you?" "No, I just do it for fun." Sun Lang poked at the buns with his chopsticks. "How did you even know how to paint the Prince of Shanle?" Shirlian asked. "Didn't you say I know everything? Of course I know how to paint him as well," Sun Lang laughed. This was a shameless way of answering, but Sun Lang evidently didn't care if his answers would make Shirlian suspicious, nor was he afraid of being questioned. so Shirley smiled and dropped the subject. Just then, there was a large commotion outside the shrine. Both of them raised their heads at the same time and exchanged looks. Someone started knocking on the door urgently, shouting, "Great Immortal, something has happened. Great Immortal, help!" Shirley opened the door and saw a number of villagers surrounding the door. The chief saw the door open and called out in relief, "Great Immortal, this person looks like he is dying. Please save him." Hearing this, Shirley rushed to the group of villagers standing in a circle around what appeared to be a cultivator. He was unkempt and disheveled, with sand all over him, and his robes and shoes were tattered. It seemed he had been running for his life for a long time before collapsing in the village, where the villagers brought him to the Puqi shrine in a hurry. Shirley told the crowd, "Don't worry, he's not dead." He knelt down and felt the man's pulse and various pressure points. On his body, Shirley found a number of magical accessories, like the 8 trigrams map, a steel sword, and so on. This man didn't appear to be an ordinary cultivator, and Shirley's heart sank. Not long later, the cultivator slowly opened his eyes and asked in a croaking voice, "Where am I?" The chief exclaimed, "This is the village of Puqi." The man mumbled to himself, I'm out, I've finally escaped." He looked around and widened his eyes, screaming in fear, "Save me, please help." Shirley had expected this reaction and gently asked, "My friend, what's going on? What are you running from? Don't be afraid, take your time to say it clearly." "Yeah, don't be scared. We've got good on our side. He'll definitely solve all your problems," one of the villagers said. None of these villagers actually saw him perform any miracles, but they had certainly become quite devout. And there wasn't much that Shirley could say. Solve all his problems? There's no guarantee of that at all. Shirley asked the cultivator, "Where did you come from?" I've come from the Banyue Pass," that cultivator replied. The villagers looked at each other. "Where is that? I've never heard of it before." Shirley explained, "The Banyue Pass is in the northwest, a fair distance away. How did you make it over here?" "I finally escaped and came here," the cultivator said. His words were incoherent and his mood was unstable. In such a situation, the more people around, the harder it was to speak with everyone talking at the same time. So Shirley said, "Let's talk inside." Shirley easily lifted the cultivator up from the ground and helped him into the shrine. He turned to say to the villagers, "Everyone, please return. Don't watch anymore." "Great Immortal, what's happened to him?" asked a villager. "Yeah, what's going on? If there's anything we can do to help." The villagers were very enthusiastic, but that was precisely what was making this more difficult. Without any choice, Shirley told them seriously, "He may be bewitched." Upon hearing this, the villagers were greatly alarmed. Bewitchment was no joke. Better to not stick around. The crowd broke up and everyone hurried away. Shirley didn't know whether to laugh or cry and shook his head. He closed the door. Sunlang was still at the table playing with his chopsticks, and he eyed the cultivator closely. "Don't worry about him. Keep eating," Shirley told him. He then set the man down on the other stool while he stood. "My friend, I am the shrine master here, and also something of a cultivator. Don't be nervous. You can tell us if there's anything. I can perhaps give you a hand if there's anything that I can help with. You mentioned the Banyue Pass." The cultivator took a few gasps of air. After coming to a place with fewer people and listening to Shirlian's comforting words, the man finally calmed down. "Have you ever heard of the Banyue Pass?" the man asked. "I have," Shirlian said. "It's a city built within an oasis in the Gobi Desert. It received its name from the beauty of its night scenery. When the half moon hangs in the night sky, I hear it's a sight to behold." "Oasis? Beauty?" The cultivator shook his head. "That's all from over 200 years ago. Half moon? More like half dead." "What do you mean?" Shirlian asked. The man's face turned white as a sheet. "Because at least half of those who pass through its gates will disappear." Shirlian had never heard of this before. "Who did you hear this from?" he asked. "I didn't hear it from anyone. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. The man sat up straight. "There was a merchant group needing to cross the desert. They knew that the place was not safe, so they hired my entire sect to guard them on their journey. But," he cried angrily, "but in the end, I'm the only one left." Shirlian waved his hand, gesturing to him to relax. "How many were you?" "With my sect, plus the merchant group, we were about 60 people." 60. In the 100 years that Xuanji had wreaked havoc, only 200 or so people lost their lives, according to Ling Wen's records. But from what this cultivator said, this matter had been going on for over 100 years. If so many people went missing every time over the course of a couple of 100 years, then the numbers would be significant once they were added up. "When did the half-moon pass become the half-dead pass?" Shirlian asked. The cultivator replied, "Maybe about 150 years ago. It was right after it became the den of a ghost." Shirlian wanted to ask about the demon in more detail, but couldn't stop the feeling that there was something not right, and it wasn't sitting well with him. At this point, there was no way to hide that strange feeling in his heart. He furrowed his brows and became silent. Suddenly, Sanlang spoke up. "You escaped from the Banyue Pass and never stopped running until now?" "Yeah, I barely survived," that cultivator sighed. "Really?" Sanlang stopped talking, but Shirlian had already understood what was amiss. He turned around and said warmly, "You must be thirsty, having escaped all this way." The man paused, but Shirlian had already placed a bowl of water in front of him. "Here, have some water." Looking at the water, hesitation flashed across the man's face. Shirlian stood next to him, hands crossed in his sleeves, waiting patiently. This man traveled far from the northwest and was running for his life, no less. He should be starving and parched. From the looks of him, it didn't seem like he ate or drank anything the entire way. Yet when he woke, all he did was talk, and never once asked for a single drop of water or for a bite to eat. He had no visible craving when faced with the food and water on the altar after entering the shrine. Heck, he didn't even spare a look at any of them. Truly, very unlike the living.